Hey, how's it going, everybody? So, back again today with a game analysis I wanted to go over of a game I played earlier today. It was a 60-minute plus 10-second game against the Chess Free app set on the level 10 setting. I've talked about this before. It's just sort of my way of getting some longer games into my practice. Everybody says we should be playing longer games. So I usually do a few of these a week, and I have it set on the level 10 setting, which is supposed to be about a 1915 ELO rating. It produces some really interesting games, really tough competition. I think a lot of times the play I get against the computer is stronger than a lot of the sort of rapid games that I get into on chess.com. Uh, in particular, the computer seems to be particularly resilient in terms of its defense. So yeah, uh, yeah. So let's just get right into it. So I had the black pieces, and computer started out with e4. I played e6, and they went for this King's Indian attack, which is the second most common move against this French defense setup. But by far the most common move, of course, is d5. So I went into sort of normal French territory here, with d5, and sorry, previous move, the most common for white is d4. I do apologize. I went into normal French territory with d5. I was expecting a capture. They didn't capture. They threw in this interesting h4 move, which, when a computer throws a rook pawn move at you, you always sort of step back a little bit, with the whole sort of newfound love of rook pawn moves by like AlphaZero and things of that nature. So here, I thought for a while, I thought a bit, I had a bit of a think in terms of what the best move might be. The first move that comes to mind is just taking here on e4, but if I do that, I'm thinking the most probable reply is they take back, in which case I almost am obliged to take their queen, and they'll take back. They've lost castling rights, but I do know in these positions, white, say in this position, it's not horrible for white that they haven't castled. A lot of people jump at this idea that, hey, you're going to cause white to lose castling rights, and yeah, sure, but we're in an endgame, and it's not as critical. So all that to say that I don't jump at the idea of trading queens, and I wasn't necessarily in the mood to play an end game, especially this early, queenless middle game. Some people would call it, I guess, but I was more sort of looking for a little bit more of a dynamic game. But I thought about this for a while, and then I considered the fact that, hey, I've got the black pieces. What am I trying to do? I felt pretty sure that if I went for this, that I would at least be equal. And what are you trying to do with the black pieces? You're trying to equalize as quickly as possible. And I heard something to this effect recently. If the best move on the board is to trade queens, then you should trade queens. And that thought just kind of hit me at this moment. So I went for this, even though I was initially reluctant. Computer here says you can also do knight c6, but it really prefers d takes e4 by a decent margin. And I was expecting them to take back, but they went in for this gambit, knight c3. And this looks scary at first, because if you look at my position, I don't have anything developed, really. What's going to happen if I accept the gambit and I take on d6 is they're going to recapture with their bishop, and they're going to have all these pieces, nicely developed, and I'm going to have to work, even though I'll be up a pawn, I'm going to have to work to make sure I don't get into trouble. Their queen is possibly coming out here somewhere. And I initially was very reluctant to take here on d3, but I ultimately did. And part of my rationale, and this is especially relevant when we play humans, is people at our level and people so at my level and lower. I would probably include even 1800 FIDE and lower has been sort of my experience. In general, if somebody gambits a pawn to me, I'll just take it, and I'll just say, hey, you got to prove that you can show compensation for this. You can get some kind of attack going, because my experience has been that by far and away, again, people at my level, in general, I would say roughly 1800 or lower, they don't get something going. They don't prove compensation. And I think gambits are probably more dangerous if you're playing blitz and you're unprepared, or if you're in a more serious game with somebody who's significantly higher rated, maybe 2000 or above. And the difference with somebody at that level is that they've probably spent a lot of time on the opening per se, and they know how to kind of make it work. Whereas people at, again, I would say roughly 1800 FIDE or lower, they don't seem, at least on average, to have spent sufficient time to consistently prove compensation or get an attack going. That's been my experience. I think probably like 75% of the time, something high, like 70% or something, like I either win or draw. Something really high like that. I haven't taken official stats or anything, but long story short, I would suggest taking the gambit and not shying away from it. So that's what I did, and they took with the bishop. And now my thought is, hey, I've got, I'm up a pawn, and I need to just get my pieces developed as quickly as possible, get castled as quickly as possible. And looking at the board, I'm thinking, okay, their pieces are generally directed at the king side, so I probably don't want to castle king side. Let's see if I can get these three guys out of the way and castle queen side, see what we can do. So I went for knight c6. They went for knight f3, bishop d7. Again, very logical. And then they threw in this monkey wrench, bishop g5, which of course throws my queen e7 ideas out the window. I went for bishop e7, just, giving myself the option to possibly take on g5, depending on what they did. Computer says here, knight f6 is also something you could play. But yeah, bishop e7 was totally fine. And here I took on g5 with the idea that, again, I'm up a pawn. Trading pieces has got to be good for me, especially their piece that is the most annoying piece they have in my position. Turns out computer says this was not ideal at all. And in fact, I should have done something like played h6, which seems to almost force the computer, well, not force, but a very likely response to something like bishop takes e7, but they could also go like bishop f4 or bishop e3. Probably that would have been the best move in the situation. Computer also says knight f6 is a possibility. And the reason, what I could gather from it as to why the computer doesn't like this move that I played so much, bishop takes g5, was when they recapture, this pawn just looks like it should be a target for me. It looks like it's just kind of hanging out here and doing nothing. But my experience has been that these pawns on the 5th rank are oftentimes more annoying and restrict your pieces as opposed to being targets. And so trying to, set up some operation where you're ultimately going to win a pawn like this, it's been my experience that that's less the way that you want to go, and more the way that you want to go is just to somehow eliminate it as quickly as possible. But yeah, that would be my guess as to why the computer doesn't like this, because, or doesn't like it as much, because this pawn can definitely be annoying. So in any case, I took, they recaptured with h6 g5, and then I continued on with my development. They continued with theirs, and then I got castled queenside. And when this happened, you know, I felt pretty good. I'm a pawn up, my king's safe, things are looking okay. And then they played the rook to d1, and I did get a little nervous here, you know, because they are setting up a battery. I've always got to be aware of tactics, make sure anything that I've got on the d file is sufficiently defended. But, you know, I was like, I feel okay. And in this position, looking around for ways to improve my position, it was hard because, again, this pawn just really cramps things. I want to develop my knight, but I don't have a good square to put it to. I was trying to think of other moves, but I was able to find the best move in the position, which I was pretty happy about. And I think it's stuff like this that this game is particularly instructive for, to me, is finding just little positional improving moves like this. This move h6, and the point here is, again, this pawn is cramping my position. I want to play h6 as opposed to f6, say, because h6 is quite possibly going to allow me to open up the h-file for my rook and get instant development with my rook as well. So that's what I did. And then computer played this, I don't know, interesting looking move, bishop b5, just putting pressure on my knight. It looks like, you know, it opens this up. But if you look at the sort of tactical resources, the tactical resources that this might present to white, black has everything more or less sufficiently defended here. So I was somewhat concerned at first when I first saw this, but when I kind of evaluated, you know, what's defending what, turns out this is not terribly dangerous at all. So I just went ahead and took on g5, and then they took on c6, and computer doesn't like these last two moves by white. And I agree. I mean, I get my bishop to a better diagonal, and I gain a tempo on their queen. I don't really see how this is particularly great for white. Computer goes in for this trade everything off, which, hey, I'm definitely happy about, being a pawn up. And now we've got this endgame where it's going to all be about technique. Black is definitely the one playing for a win here, but the rest of the game is definitely instructive in terms of good technique or maybe not so good technique. I do feel like I'm getting in a lot of endgames like this recently. Like, there's not some killer tactical sequence in the middle game. I'm getting to a lot of endgames, which I don't know what to make of that. But they went ahead and played knight takes g5. I think, I felt like at least something like king e7 was pretty close to force, but evidently not. You could play moves like knight h6, or here I think computer is also saying rook h5, which is kind of bizarre. Yeah, we'll put a pin in that. But the main point is king e7 just made a lot of sense to me. Computer comes up with knight e4, and here, you know, I can take and just trade more pieces off. But in this kind of endgame, I'd like to keep my bishop if possible. It seems more important to just continue my development, so I went ahead with knight f6. And yeah, computer continued their development, defending the threatened piece here. And at this point I was like, okay, I am up a pawn. I like my king position. I like my active rook. Let's just start trading off pieces and try to you know, accentuate those factors. So I took, they recaptured, and again I could have taken on e4, but I wanted to keep my bishop if I could. So I tried to get my rook active on the h-file. attacking their knight. Computer also says this move, rook d8, was possible as well. And I think in retrospect, I probably would have liked that, but I was thinking, hey, my rook is active on the h-file. My king and pawn are stopping any entry points after something like rook d1. So yeah, not a terrible difference, but maybe rook d8 was slightly better. Computer goes knight g3, and then I went f6 or g6. I really like this move as well. And again, this is to the point of instructive little positional improving moves that I think that this game was good for. And the point here is this just restricts the knight, and also more importantly, in a lot of variations with this rook pinning here, this knight, could come in with it before this move. With this rook pinning here, this knight could come in with check, and could be annoying. So just as an example, a natural move like rook d4, trying to take advantage of or take over this open file, would lose immediately to knight f5, forking the king and rook. And of course I couldn't take because of the pin on the king. So yeah, g6, just trying to restrict the knight. Sort of odd move here by the computer. a3, they're just improving their queenside pawns a bit. And then I went to the open file. It was also possible to play like this, with the idea of if the knight moves, then we're attacking g2. If they try to kick our rook, we can just take their knight. But I was somewhat scared here of this move, rook e5. Turns out, there wasn't a whole lot of reason to be scared about that. But yeah, we could have gotten a position like this. Check the king back and then get to d4. So a similar position to what actually appeared in the game. This active rook isn't necessarily as scary as it might look just initially. But yeah, I played rook to d4, and then they played c3, hitting my rook, and so I just got active down on their second rank. And when they played rook b1, I was really happy with my position. This rook is horribly passive. So yeah, I just felt good. They could have also played rook e2, to which a natural move like rook takes e2, just trading the rooks off, actually is somewhat inferior to a move like rook d1, king h2, f5, and the game goes on from there, where black is active. We're keeping the rooks on the board. There are possible ideas of going here if the rook moves, going to d2. So yeah, that was something white could have done, but instead they passively defended. I played f5, and again, the rationale of playing f5 was my advantages in this game are the bishop. My advantages are the bishop versus the knight, and also this kingside pawn majority I have. So I wanted to get the kingside pawn majority going. That was the whole point. They retreated their knight, attacking my rook, and then I played rook to e2. They played b3, and here, again, we have another set of moves that just sort of small, minor moves that kind of induce small concessions by my opponent, which, again, I think are particularly instructive. So I'm threatening to win a pawn here, but of course white can defend, and the point is what resulting structure white is going to have. So they move their a pawn forward, we play rook c2, they move their c pawn forward, and yeah, this, I've got their pawns on light squares, so it's a possible target for my bishop later on. And at some point I have the opportunity to fix their structure with a5, making the advance b4 more difficult, which of course in the current position they're not going to do because my rook would be taking c4. But yeah, just little positional improvements there. So I played e5. They played knight e3, hitting my rook. I took the file back. And then they went in for a rook trade, which, again, I was happy to see. And, if I take the rook, which is what I did, in this resulting position, I've got a bishop versus a knight, and this knight is horribly placed. It's got to waste time getting off the edge of the board, and I've got an extra pawn to boot. So I felt really good about my position here. And I played this move a5, just restricting this structure and keeping these pawns on light squares, making sure they would be a target for my bishop. They played knight c3, and then I had a simple plan here, which was just bring my king up here and take this guy. So that's what I did. King c5, and now they try to protect against me coming in. But hey, I've got other options, right? And that's what I went for. Bishop e4. And now they played, they played here this move, knight c1, just protecting this last weak point. I played bishop c2, applying pressure, and then just looking to play king b4. And then they brought their king up. And here, I thought a bit about the difference between king b4 intending to just take on b3, and whether I first needed that or whether I first needed to restrict their king with g5. After a bit of calculation, just sort of figuring out, if we trade off minor pieces on b3 and they come and take my g6 pawn, and then I start taking these guys, who's going to be first? And the net result of that calculation was that, I determined that I would be, and so I just went for it. I just sort of forgot about, neglected to the defense of my kingside pawns, which was fine. It would have also been fine to play g5, as it turns out. So yeah, I played king b4, and then they came in with their king, and I started to take their pawns. They checked me. I took another pawn. They took one of my pawns. And here I started to want to put my king on squares where it was going to be less likely to be checked by the knight. So I went here instead of king d5, with the thought that when they take here, if I want to defend, they can then just check me, and they're forking these 2 points. They bring their king over. Yeah, I just wanted to avoid that kind of upcoming check. So yeah, I played the king to d4 and just gained a tempo on the knight. They took my pawn. I took their pawn. They came in to put pressure on my f pawn. I defended. They brought their knight around, and then I started pushing my pawn. They checked me, and then I just tried to get away from their knight and tried to shepherd this pawn up the board. They brought the king over. I guess the idea was to possibly come over here, but that's a really slow plan in this kind of position. I played a3, and this was the end of the game. I mean, I'm going to queen my pawn. Yeah, I don't see how they're going to stop that. I'm stopping these 2 entry points for the knight, and I mean, this is all over. So a really clean game there. If we look at the reports of this on chess.com, again, this is done at a depth of 26, and a depth of 26. It says that the computer had 3 inaccuracies, 0 mistakes, and 0 blunders, and I had 1 inaccuracy, 0 mistakes, and 0 blunders. So all in all, a game that I'm really happy with. I mean, if it turns out that my biggest mistake is to play this move here, bishop takes g5, I mean, I'm pretty happy about that. So an instructive game on a clean win when they decide to gambit a pawn, as they did in this situation. It looks like it's going to be scary, but again, just go for it. Would be my suggestion. If you're not playing somebody like super high rated who probably knows 15-20 moves of theory, for the Gambit line. If you're not playing somebody like that, I would definitely say go for it. So yeah, no real mistakes at all, and just a lot of good sort of technique in the end game with some instructive positional improvement moments. So yeah, I mean, I hope you guys got something out of that. And I'll probably be making a rapid game video or something here tomorrow. Yeah, we'll see. Let me know what you think in the comments, and we'll see you next time. Thanks a lot. Bye.